Good evening, everyone, and welcome. The hour of 6:30 PM having arrived, I will call to order this regular meeting of the Planning Board. This meeting is being broadcast live on the City of Keene YouTube channel. The video is also streamed on the city's website and is posted on the website by the end of the next business day, barring any technical difficulties. Anyone wishing to view a copy of the agenda and supporting materials will find it on the city website. To receive electronic copies of future agenda packets, please go to the homepage and subscribe to the city meetings email list. The public and other board members will be recognized to ask questions and make comments on the agenda item under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. Will staff please conduct the roll?
Harold Farrington,
Here.
Roberta Mastrogiovanni, Mayor Jay Kahn, Councilor Mike Remy,
Here.
Sarah Vizani, Ryan Clancy,
Here.
Kenneth Kost,
Here.
Armando Rangel,
Here.
Stefan Mayu,
Present.
I'm already in alternates, Randon Markelon. Here. And Tammy Adams and Mike Hafer.
So we have two alternates?
Yes, and I believe you have room to invite both of them to vote.
So please note that I would like to ask our two alternates, Randon and Stefan, to be regular voting members for the purposes of tonight's meeting. Thank you. All right, next up, meetings of the previous meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the July 22 meeting?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any comments or questions on the minutes? I hate to do this, but I have like 6. Okay, so just bear with me. In line 109, insert the word note. I don't know if you're on that. See where that is, Mary?
Sorry, yes, I've caught that. It should say the applicant has added a note to the plan.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right. Line 257. I think the missing word in there is parking spaces. Line 261, this is just an inversion, so I think we need to switch the words existing and the. And in line 271, the city would be forwarded the results of these tests. And one more, line 297, in the parentheses, replace the word expect with the word accept. That's all I got. All right, so motion having been made and seconded, and some editing changes recommended. I'll call for a vote now. All those in favor of the minutes? Any opposed? Minutes are approved unanimously. Thank you. All right. Now on to a final vote on conditional approvals. As a matter of practice, the board will issue a final vote on all conditionally approved plans after all of the conditions precedent have been met. This final vote will be the final approval and will start the 30-day appeal clock. Are there any applications tonight that are ready for a final vote? Mary?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. There are two applications that are ready for a final vote, one of which was noted in the memo in your packet on page 26. And this is, the project number is PB-2024-06. This was a 3-lot subdivision at 435 Chapman Road. And the conditions were that the owner's signature appear on both sheets of the plan set, submittal of 4 paper copies, 2 Mylar copies, and a digital copy of the complete plan set, inspection of lot monuments by the Public Works Department, and submittal of a check to cover the cost of recording fees, and submittal of documentation demonstrating that the application has received state subdivision approval from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. And all of these conditions have been met.
Thank you. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for final approval. Counselor Remy?
Mr. Chair, move to issue final approval for PB 2024-06.
Thank you. May I get a second? Mr. Mayhew? Thank you. Let's move to the vote then. All those in favor of final approval for PB 2024-06? Any opposed? Final approval is granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And there's one more application
Oh, okay.
that
Thank
just, oh, sorry.
No, please, Ms. Brenner.
Okay, thank you. That just actually met the conditions today. This is project PB-2024-08, the Cottage Court conditional use permit for the 2-unit townhouse at 0 Ellis Court. And the conditions of approval for this project were that the engineer's stamp appear on the site grading plan, the owner's signature appears on the site plan and architectural plans, submittal of 5 paper copies and 1 digital copy of the site plan and architectural plans. And then the fourth one was submittal of an effective screening plan between the abutters to show a 6-foot tall fence at the south of the property and ornamental shrubs on Colony Court to create a buffer that will have no impact on drainage or flooding. And so to meet that condition, the applicant submitted a revised plan that shows a 6-foot tall solid vinyl privacy fence for that portion of the condition, and then ornamental crabapple trees along the frontage.
Great. Before I ask for, well, let's move to the motion then. So at this time, I'll take a motion for final approval. Counselor Remy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Move to issue final approval for PB 2024-08.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Rangel. Any discussion or questions based on the 2 items that were, or really the 2 items that were continued over or as conditions precedent? Any questions or discussion? Mr. Cost?
I just had a question about how that works as far as the landscaping, because we talked about it, I remember, and talked about invasive species. Am I at the right project, I think?
Yep.
Yeah, so, so the drawings have been turned in and reviewed by the city, and the city's finding them adequate in meeting the requirements. Is that, because we haven't seen that, I don't think we have to, but I'm just wondering how that all connects back to us.
No, great question. So the plans haven't really changed at all, except that it shows the location of the fence and the location where the plantings will go along the frontage. I do have the plans with me. They're up here on this table, so if the board would like to view them before voting, I could pass them around, if that would be helpful. Or you could stand up and go take a look at them.
Mr. Cost, that was your question?
Yeah,
so-
no, I don't need to see them. I was just wondering, as long as they've been reviewed and, from the city's point of view, they meet what we talked about, I'm comfortable. I just was wondering how it circled back to the board.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
So they meet the condition which specified the fence and the ornamental shrubs along the frontage. The condition didn't talk about invasives at all, so I don't believe the applicant is being held to anything with respect to invasive species removal or anything like that. So I'm not entirely sure what their plan is for those.
So in the discussion, and I think in the notes, I recall reading, the applicant did say they would be willing to take invasive species out. So I don't know, how does that happen?
So, actually, this is a good segue into the training that's going to happen later on this
Of course I need
evening
training.
for site plan review. But the applicant can, during their presentation, can say things like that, but unless it's made a condition of approval, they're not, or it's shown or depicted in some way on the plan, it's not something that we can necessarily hold them to. So while they said that and they may plan to do that, it's not something that the city would enforce, if that makes sense, because a representation during a presentation is not a binding commitment. Did that answer your question?
I think so. We should have requested that be part of one of the conditions,
If that was, yes, yeah.
if we wanted that. Okay.
Okay, any other questions or comments? So at this time, I'll call the vote. All those in favor of final approval for PB 2024-08? Any opposed? Final approval issued for PB 2024-08. Thank you. Okay. At this time, we'll move along to a continued public hearing for PB 2024-07, site plan for Dinkbee's redevelopment, 510 Washington Street. Applicant Fieldstone Consultants, PLLC, on behalf of owner OM 510 Washington Street LLC, proposes to demolish the existing Dinkbee's building on the property at 510 Washington Street, TMP number 532-003-000. Construct a new approximately 6,256 square foot building in its place, and expand the number of vehicle fueling stations. Waivers are requested from sections 20.2.1.b, 20.6.e, 20.7.2.c, and 20.14.3.d of the LDC related to the submittal of a drainage report, parking lot landscaping, light trespass, and parking. The parcel is 0.74 acres and is located in the Commerce District. Okay. So at this time, I think, do we need the applicant to update, or are we going right to staff update? Mr.
Generally,
Clements, yeah.
yeah, generally we do the applicant first, but I can just briefly remind the board of the action we've taken so far. And then I'll let Mr. Noonan explain the traffic report and the drainage report.
All right, that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
So the application was first heard last month on the July 22nd meeting. The board deliberated and took public comment, and then voted to continue the application to August 26, which is where we are now. The board did take action on the 3 waiver requests and approved the waiver for light trespass and the street parking location being in front of the building as opposed to solely on the sides and to the rear of the building. The third waiver, which was a request to not submit the drainage report, was denied. The applicant has since submitted both that traffic study that we were hoping was going to be submitted by the planning board meeting last month, but that ended up not being the case. So they submitted the traffic report, and then they also prepared and submitted the drainage report. Both planning and public works engineering staff had a chance to review those reports, and we all believe that they meet the planning board standards, and we're comfortable with the drainage design for the site. as well as the improvements in regards to traffic and site circulation.
Thank you, Mr. Clements. All right, this time I'd like to ask Mr. Noonan to add his comments.
Yes, good evening. John Noonan from Fieldstone Land Consultants here on behalf of our client. So it's the OM 510 Washington Street LLC. As Evan mentioned, we submitted a drainage report. That was one of the waiver requests that we originally asked for. Overall, plans didn't change. We made a minor change to the width of the stone trench that we had before, so infiltration trench that was on the plans previously. So that was changed and showing that the post-development runoff from the site and velocity and volume is reduced from the existing condition. So that's based on the reduction in impervious surfaces on site, and then also just capturing most of the water that from the redevelopment area and directing into that infiltration trench. And then the second piece for traffic, we submitted a traffic report from VHB Engineering, so they utilized DOT counts that were from 2023, June of 2023, some very recent counts on Washington Street, and showed that the capacity of Washington Street would not be diminished. So pretty straightforward on each one. Use is the same, very minor, 2 more pumps added to the gas station, so.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Noonan. We appreciate your willingness to be flexible and work with us on these
Certainly.
2 studies. Board members have questions for the applicant? Okay. All right, thanks. Mr. Clements, do you have anything else to add at this time?
The only other thing to discuss would be the proposed motion with both the reports being submitted. The suggested conditions of approval are very straightforward with owner's signature, security for landscaping, sedimentation, and as-built, and then the prior to commencement for a pre-construction meeting to discuss expectations as the project moves forward with development.
Okay, thank you. Board members have questions for staff? Okay. All right, so at this time, I will entertain a motion for this proposal. Oh, yeah, correct. Yeah, sorry. Thank you. At this time, I would invite anyone from the public who would like to comment on this proposal. You guys here for this? No. Okay, thank you. So I will close the public portion of the meeting. And now I'll move to entertain a motion. Thank you, Mike, Mr. Remy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a comment, I don't think there's any regional impact for this one. I'll put that on the record. Though hopefully they pull in customers from the region, but I don't think it's going to affect our neighboring towns. So I move to approve PB 2024-07 as shown on the plan identified as 510 Washington Street Gas Station redevelopment prepared by Fieldstone Land Consultants at a scale of 1 inch equals 20 feet, dated June 14th, 2024, and last revised July 8th, 2024. Is that still right? The last revised?
That sounds right. Yeah.
I just didn't know if the most recent change.
July 8th,
Okay, perfect.
2024, yep.
With the following, July 8th, 2024, and the architectural elevations prepared by Metropole Design at a scale of 1/4 inch equals 1 foot, dated July 8th, 2024, with the following conditions. Prior to final approval and signature by the planning board chair, the following conditions precedent shall be met. Owner's signature shall appear on plan. Submittal of security for landscaping, sedimentation, and erosion control, and as-built plans in a form and amount acceptable to the city engineer. Submittal of 5 full-size paper copies and 1 digital copy of the final plan. And 2, subsequent to final approval and signature by the planning board chair, the following conditions shall be met. Prior to the commencement of site work, the community development department shall be notified when all erosion control measures are installed, and the community development director or their designee shall inspect the erosion control measures to ensure compliance with this site plan and all City of Keene regulations.
Thank you. I ask for a second.
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Markland, thank you. Okay, any discussion by the board? For my part, I would just like to say, I think this is a great project. I think you guys have done, checked all the boxes with respect to our standards. And I appreciate you doing that, and look forward to this moving forward. So with that, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Any opposed?
That's all.
Motion to approve is granted.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda is a advice and comment. This is an opportunity for the planning board to provide guidance to an applicant in a non-binding session. The request for advice and comment is for a proposed development at 270 Beaver Street. In accordance with RSA 674, subsection 41, Roman numeral I, D. Prospective owner Ken Suskin seeks planning board review and comment regarding his request for city council authorization for the issuance of a building permit where the street giving access to the lot upon which the dwelling is proposed to be placed is a Class 6 road. Okay. So at this time, I would invite applicant to come forward and present.
Good evening. By the way, my wife, Monica Marshall, is part of this process, and she is, we are,
So I know we said it,
Hopefully
but
purchasing
would
this
you mind
together.
please just stating your name and address?
I'm Ken Suskind. My wife, Monica Marshall, and I live at 81 Terrace Street, which is right uphill from the property that we are looking to purchase.
Thank you.
So my wife and I have made an offer for 270 Beaver Street. It's conditioned on receiving that building permit and the driveway permit from the city. As far as the driveway permit is concerned, I sent you folks a letter sent to me by Donald Lucier from Public Works, indicating what we would need to do under Article 23.5.5 to be eligible for a street access permit. And we're here to say that we're prepared to do all of those things indicated. There are a couple of things that, have been brought to my attention. One is that the city may allow a property owner to get a street access permit, but we would need the city council to sign off on that. That is one of the conditions of our offer. We are also asking the city to make an exception to Resolution R 2028, in which the city council resolved that no permit shall be issued for development on Class 6 roads. I have learned that this resolution was in line with NHRSA 674-41, which prohibits issuance of a building permit on a lot if the street giving access is a Class 6 highway, unless, and this is, I guess, via the state, unless certain conditions are met. Those conditions are very similar to the conditions that need to be met for the street access permit. All of those conditions for both permits were included in my letter to you dated August 10th, 2024, or in that letter I referred to Mr. Lucier's conditions, what he had put forth to me in a letter. I'd be happy to read them again if anyone would like me to do so.
The letter, just for the record, the letter was in our agenda packet, so does anyone need, okay.
Okay.
I think we're good with that, Mr. Suskin.
So before I move forward and sort of clarify what's been told to me and what I understand is need to be done, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on this property and on my wife and I. In 1997, my wife and I purchased our property at 81 Terrace Street. We are in a butter, as I say, we're right uphill to the property on Beaver Street. At the time, the Beaver Street property had an older couple living in a small house on the property, the Bushies. The city took that house down sometime, I think, somewhere between 2012 and 2015. I don't know the exact, I can't remember the exact year. But they were living there when we lived there, and they lived there for a number of years after we moved in. My wife reminds me that they spent winters in Florida. I don't remember that, but I believe her. But eventually, they didn't return to their house. We came to recognize that they no longer lived there, and some other people had moved in. And that clearly didn't work out because sometime later, the city took down the house. So I think the relevance that I'm bringing here is that this was a property that had a house and a driveway on it in the relatively recent past. Our plans for the property, if we get the approval from 2/3 of the city council, are we wish to build a small affordable house for our daughter to live in. Given the steepness of much of this land, a small house is required. It really won't hold, much more than a small house. Happily, our daughter is very interested in this type and size of house. It's the sort of type and size of house she's desired for years. We hope that the house can be a model of practicality and affordability for others to emulate. We are planning it to be approximately 500 square feet. My daughter has spent the last few years studying how others use their space efficiently and comfortably in tiny houses. So a 500 square foot house built to code on a solid foundation will afford her plenty of space to put many of those ideas into effect. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Board members have questions for the applicant? Councilor Remy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a question as much as you're causing me to, I'm taking notes over here because I think we need to review that resolution R 2028. So I'm looking at city staff with that, if we need to look at why that still exists and it's misaligned to state statute. So I'm taking notes on that. 'Cause that may add some complication for you, I'm sure, and it's something where we're all interested in adding housing to this community, I think, so.
That's great. I do want to say that for some reason, I've been given a deadline of October 15th. That makes things a little tricky. We were hoping to go on vacation after the next city council meeting. It sounds like what you're saying today is that you're just sort of listening and there's not going to be any decisions made or there's not going to be any recommendations made to the city council. Is that my understanding?
No, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to make a recommendation.
Okay.
If we vote in the affirmative, that will be a recommendation from the planning board to the city council.
Okay, and that will happen before the next city council meeting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all I needed to know.
Can I say something? I just want to say that we have been really interested in the small housing movement in Keene. We came to the meetings last.
Yeah, could you just use a
Sorry.
microphone for us?
We came to the
Thanks.
meetings that were
Mine.
at.
Use the microphone. They
Microphones
need
all
to
over
hear
the
you.
place.
Just click the
Okay.
button so
I was going to say,
it's green.
we're really interested in this idea of small housing in Keene, and there's such a shortage. We came to the meetings last spring that were at Hannah Grimes. So getting this property and being able to put a small house on it is sort of, it's a dream come true for our daughter, but it's also something we're really interested in and think Keene is really going to be moving into in the future. So, yeah, to have these little tiny lots that you can't do much else with except put a lovely little small house on is very appealing to us on a personal level.
Thank you. Just for our note taker, that's Monica Marshall speaking. Thank you. Our note taker is remote.
Gotcha.
Good. Other questions? Staff have comments or questions? Ms. Brenner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mary Brenner, Senior Planner. I don't have much to add to what the applicant said, other than that your role tonight is really just to review and comment on this application, keeping in mind that the reason that this request is going to City Council is simply because this property has both frontage and access from a Class 6 road. And so because of that, even though it's right next to the Class 5 portion of the road, and even though a house used to be on this lot, it falls into that category where it requires city council authorization for the issuance of a building permit under the RSA. And then also in accordance with the street access standards, it requires city council approval before a street access permit can be granted. And so really what I think the city council is going to be looking to you for is any sort of recommendation that you have with respect to whether or not this development makes sense in this location.
Thank you, Ms. Brenner. Mr. Cost?
So I just want to make sure, I guess I'm looking at the map, and I don't know that exact neighborhood, I apologize, but
No problem.
looks like we're saying from Oak Street to Reservoir is the Class 6?
Yes, do you want me to describe it?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. I mean, I imagine up until then, Class 5, it's paved, it does normal city, what a normal city street would look like, but then at Oak, it breaks?
Then it just cuts off
there.
So then,
I
yeah,
think just after Oak,
Yeah.
just east of Oak.
And that's not there.
okay.
So Oak butts up against where this property would have its driveway, and now it's called the Beaver Street Path. And it's basically a little bit of cement steps, some cement steps until it gets to Terrace Street. And then from Terrace Street to Reservoir Street, it's just through the woods. So it's a dirt path
I know,
going
yeah,
uphill.
I do know.
And this
Yeah.
is the only property that actually is a Class 6 highway. I mean, it's the only property that it has to be accessed by this Class 6 highway. There are no other properties.
I don't think it's relevant to our decision, but you've looked at where the house might be situated on the property, and
Yeah.
Yes.
because there seem to be pretty good slopes in that area.
We're aware of the hillside ordinance and, and what that, entails. And, we are looking at a sort of a longer and narrower house rather than a square house. And,
Okay.
yeah, so, yeah, we are aware.
Yeah, it actually comes off of Terrace Street on that hill, and then there's a flat area where the Bushies had their house, and then there's a little bit more of a slope, and that was where the driveway was and still is. And then there's a little bit more of a slope, and then it's to the neighbors on Oak Street,
Great.
actually Beaver Street.
Mr. Clancy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is part of my dog walk, so I'm familiar with the property. Where was the original driveway and where was the original house on this site? Because it is quite a slope, so, and my other question would be to city staff, because of the nature of this property, would this applicant have to come to planning board for any approvals?
Well, we're coming to I'm not sure I understand your last question. We have to come to the planning board for a driveway permit approval, and also a building permit approval because of the resolutions that are in force right now. But there are these ways that you can, at least as far as the state is concerned, there are ways in which you can give conditional approval.
The driveway into the property is only not even 20 feet, probably 10 feet? It's very close.
I would say it's about 12 to 15 feet.
Yeah, very close to where it comes off of Oak Street,
Well, Beaver Street, actually. So,
Beaver Street.
yeah,
I
so you
guess
come
would
to
be
the
right.
end of you come to the end of a regular Class 5 highway, and basically on both sides on one side you have houses on Beaver Street that go right up to the end of the Class 5 highway. And then you have, like a 20-foot incline, which is the Class 6 highway. That then ends, and you've got dirt, boulders, which you sort of traverse, you walk up, and then you have these very steep cement steps that the city put in to get people to get up to Terrace Street before they walk up the path over to Beaver Street. And the whole point originally, I guess, was they were thinking of doing a Beaver Street extension all the way to Reservoir Street, and then I think probably the city recognized, well, that would be hard to do.
Ms. Brenner, do you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to direct your attention to the screen. So the imagery that's shown on your screen right now is imagery from 2015. And so, can you all see my cursor? You can? Okay, so this is right about where the Class 5 portion of the road ends, and this is where the Class 6 portion starts. And this highlighted yellow portion is the lot in question. So the distance from the Class 5 portion to the lot is not, it's pretty short. And then in this, you can kind of see where the driveway used to be, and I believe this is the old house that was there, right here.
Yep.
Um,
It was
Yep.
very close to the border of the property.
Yep, so if that's what was there, I guess 2015 must have been right before the house was demolished. And then right here, you can kind of see where those steps are that Mr. Susskind was referring to. So this portion of Beaver Street has never been maintained.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Oh, that's good.
Mr. Clancy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Where does the city sewer and water hook up for this? How far would they have to extend that line? Or is there currently sewer and water to that property?
They, Public Works tells me that there is sewer, water. I don't know exactly where it is, but it's there.
The Bushies were hooked up to city water and electricity and sewage.
Ms. Brenner?
As I just turned on the sewer and water map on the screen, so assuming this is accurate, you can see here, I believe the blue is water and green is sewer, I hope. So that you can see it right here on the right-hand side along Terrace Street, and then it looks like it does extend up a portion of the Class 6 portion of Beaver Street.
So the blue line water, the blue line is water?
I believe
As far as the sewer line?
It looks like the sewer line extends further. So I don't know if previously they connected to Beaver Street or Terrace Street. It could have been either, yeah.
Mr. Cost?
So from Terrace Street, I'm guessing because of the steps, that's a steep slope down to the site. That's why there couldn't be a
Yep.
driveway
Yeah.
off of Terrace Street, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess the regulations allow for, if there's absolutely no other access, in theory, it does allow to, but that would be a steep driveway and not,
Terrace Street is
Not very-
scary enough to live on.
Counselor Remy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you're ready for it, I could make a motion.
I am ready for it. Thank you.
I move to recommend that the city council grant the request to authorize the issuance of building permits for development on the property located at 270 Beaver Street.
Thank you. May I get a second? Mr. Cost, thank you. All right. Any further discussion? Mr. Clancy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a comment about that cement area leading up from Oak to Terrace is in quite disrepair, and I mean, the steps are falling apart, and it's not really that great, and it doesn't seem like the city will be maintaining any of that, so I just wanted to make that noted.
Thank you. Mr. Mayhew?
Does that just cover building, or does that also cover driveway as well? Or do they have to be separate?
So this is just,
Counselor Rennie.
thank you, Mr.
Yep.
Chair. This is just in response to the requirement under that code for, what was it? It's RSA 411 something or 4111. No, it's not that one. Where is it?
674-41.
674-41. I knew there was a 41 in there. It's in response to that where the planning board has to make a recommendation to the city council on them saying it's okay to build off a class 6 road. The city council is also gonna have to suspend their rules, which was the reference to the 2/3 vote, because the existence of R 2028, which says basically we can't do that. So the city council has to suspend our own rules and allow for approval of it. So there'll be a whole series of votes around that, which is triggering my other conversation. But this is just to say that they're gonna have to come back with the good driveway permit and that piece, hopefully at the next meeting, and they'll be ready to go.
Thank you for your explanation. Any other discussion? Okay, so I'd like to call the vote. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Motion is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
Very much. Have a nice evening.
Okay. Next, we have a master plan update. Ms. Brenner, would you
Sure. Thank you,
like
Ms.
to offer that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mary Brenner, Senior Planner. The master plan project continues to move forward, and we did include on your agenda packet for this month both the link to the project portal, which is keenmasterplan.com, as well as the steering committee webpage, which is where the minutes that have been approved are posted, as well as the agenda packets. 1 week before the meeting, the agenda packets get posted, and those include the draft minutes from the previous month. So I just wanted to make a note of that for folks who are interested in following along. And then the other thing, we don't post the minutes as a matter of practice. The draft minutes aren't posted right away, but you can always email us within 5 business days. We'll have those ready, and we can email them out to you if you want to review the draft minutes. The project right now, the last meeting was August 6th. That was a workshop-style meeting, and that's where the Master Plan Steering Committee started to identify key themes and start to build them out. And that's actually going to be continuing at the September meeting. Tuesday, September 3rd, I believe, is the meeting date. It will be at Huberton Hall again, and it will also be a workshop-style meeting where the Master Plan Steering Committee will be breaking out into small groups to continue to discuss those key themes. And that's all in preparation for the October 5th Future Summit, which is the next big public engagement opportunity. So you're all invited to attend that. It's a Saturday, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. It will be at Huberton Hall. And that's really the transition point from phase 1 of the project, which is all about the visioning portion and developing that community-wide vision. Transitioning from that phase into the implementation phase. So the actual drafting of the document, coming up with the goals, objectives, strategies under each of those key themes, developing an action plan. So there's a lot coming up. We are still doing outreach, though, for the visioning phase of the project. So we're working on setting up sessions with the high school and Keene State College. We're hoping to get into classrooms and find other ways to reach sort of a younger demographic. We're also planning to go to 100 Nights to talk to some of their residents. So we are still doing some ongoing outreach and engagement with folks around the vision. So that opportunity is still there if you know of any groups that would be interested in having some input into that. I think the only other thing to mention is that we have some videos up on the website, so if you feel so inclined, you could share them on social media. Anything that I missed? Nope, okay. Yeah, the Future Summit is on a Saturday. I can't remember if I mentioned that or not. So it is a Saturday morning, Saturday before Pumpkin Fest, and 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Yeah, and we hope to see you all there. However, we do ask that you let us know if you're planning to attend, just because you are members of a public body, so we can kind of keep track of whether or not a quorum will be present.
Thank you, Ms. Brenner. Any questions? Several of us are involved, so half of us are involved, actually. Any questions from the other half? Okay, thanks. All right, next item is a letter of support for Invest NH Housing Opportunity Planning, or IHOP, grant application. So, would you like to handle that, Mary?
Yes,
All
sorry,
right,
it's
thank
me
you.
again.
Ms. Brenner?
Thank you,
Yep,
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
So this item is coming before you because the Invest NH Housing Opportunity and Planning Grant Program is running another round of funding. It's called HOP 2.0, is kind of what they're calling it. And this, as a reminder, is a funding source to help communities increase the supply of housing in their community, especially workforce or affordable housing. And there's 3 types of planning and zoning grants that you can go for. The first type is a grant to help you plan. So to create a plan, do a study, and you can use it for like a chapter of your master plan. The city of Keene used it to do the housing needs analysis that came out last year. The second phase is to do a regulatory audit, which we have not done. And then the third phase is to use the funds to actually develop regulations that will hopefully increase housing development in your community. And so in the past, the city has utilized these grants for the housing needs analysis, the cottage court ordinance, and then to do the neighborhood parking project, which actually resulted in 3 different ordinances that are in draft form right now, but will be coming forward soon. So you'll be seeing those in the near future, at least some of them. 2 of them are actually just going directly to city council, but 1 is going to be coming to you for a recommendation on a zoning change. And so one of the issues that came up throughout all 3 of those projects was short-term rentals. We had it come up especially during the cottage court ordinance. We heard that concern come up from the public. We had it come up from a couple of city councilors. And basically the concern that we've been hearing is that there's a growing number of short-term rentals in our community, and there's an interest to better understand how much short-term rentals are growing and how they're impacting the community, but also whether or not that's taking away from our housing supply or if it's impacting the housing supply. And in particular with the cottage court ordinance, the concern was voiced that, if we pass this ordinance and cottage court developments come about and get developed, what's to stop them all from just becoming short-term rentals instead of housing? That was really the question that was posed. And so staff has started to research short-term rentals, and what we've found, and in talking with New Hampshire Housing, they kind of agreed that there's not really a community in New Hampshire that's figured it out yet. So there wasn't like an easy, okay, let's just copy what this town did or what that city did. It's really new ground that needs to be charted. And so we are proposing to hire a consultant to help us with that, both to work through the state level regulatory framework, as well as what would work here locally and what our community actually would like to see. So part of what we're proposing to do is actually get a solid understanding of how many short-term rentals we actually have, and where are they located in the city? Do we have a concentration in certain areas, and that's why it feels like we have a lot, or do we actually have a lot? You know, we just want to get some actual data to be able to measure and track where they are. And then we would like to work with the consultant to develop regulations that are appropriate for short-term rentals, again, based on what the community wants to see, and to mitigate their impact on housing supply if that is actually something that's occurring. So, happy to answer questions. This really grew out of a request from the you and the PLD committee in hearing those concerns from the public and from some of the elected officials in the city.
Councilor Remy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does the planning department have access to Airbnb's city portal? Which gives access to like data for what their usage is in the city?
No, I think we tried, so AirDNA has a lot of data. We don't have a paid account though, so what we can see is very broad. Like we can't see very specific data for our area, other than a map that kind of shows you approximately where they're located.
Okay. We should catch up after the meeting because I gave a list to Airbnb of people to get access to the city portal. And I believe I put at least someone from planning on there, but I don't remember. And I don't know if they told that person that they got access. So we can follow up on that.
Mr. Cost?
Thank you. So short-term rental, Airbnb or VRBO, but is it also other kind of short-term rentals, like, you know, a couple of weeks for visiting nurses or things like that, or maybe even furnished apartments for, you know, people who come into town until they find something, or are we worried about those kind of short-term rentals too? Or really the vacation kind of Airbnb thing? Because the one I just kind of described seems to fit a real need. Maybe it's not permanent housing for people, but there seems to be a need for that to get people here.
Yeah, so the proposal is just to research and better understand short-term rentals in the city, and we're not limiting that just to Airbnb or VRBO or any of those, where it would be defined by being a short-term stay versus permanent residency, and but also distinguished from a hotel or motel. So that's kind of what we're interested in exploring. And then in terms of whether or not the community and city council would like to see any regulations regulating those, I think that's still an open discussion about what exactly would be regulated and how. So for example, one thing that we've talked about potentially doing is maybe there's an administrative like licensing process so that we can sort of track where they are and make sure that they're meeting basic life safety standards. But that would pretty much be it. Or there could be a use definition in zoning so that there's an actual definition, and then you could regulate, you know, where these could occur within the city and how. That we don't have any specific or concrete proposals yet. I think we still need to do a lot more study and understanding and talking to the community to see what's actually out there today, and we want to actually understand what the benefits of these are as well as the perceived impacts to the community, because as you mentioned, there could be instances where it's really benefiting our community to have these for things like traveling nurses. So that would all be part of what the consultant would help us do, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Mr. Clancy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know there's a handful of communities in New Hampshire that have passed ordinances in the last few years, and some of them are also being challenged in court, but there are templates out there in New Hampshire for what's working and what's not working. So I'm a little hesitant for us to be getting a consultant when there, is data on short-term rentals. And there are a couple examples within New Hampshire of ordinances that are going through or being challenged, so we could kind of direct ours if we were to go forward with one. So I feel like if we're gonna go for this type of grant, I would like to see a different thing that we're applying for than something that there's kind of information out there already for, that we could figure out ourselves.
Well, I think, without trying to answer for staff, they're talking about this data specific to Keene with how these are, how many there are, and how they're used, and what the community thinks about them. I think you're right, when we get to a point where we want to craft some ideas for either zoning or regulations, we can piggyback or, copy other towns.
Thank you. Just that we're going through a master plan process where these questions could be asked to the community. And we did just have a housing study. I forget how much of that entailed short-term rentals, but, and then Councilor Remy also mentioned access to some Airbnb data. So I believe there's some other, this is a great grant opportunity, but I think we could focus on something more productive for the community.
Thank you. Ms. Markland?
Thank you. I don't disagree, but I think that's personally, but it has been brought up in so many meetings. So I think having the information would be really helpful to inform, future proposals or city council meetings, or whenever it's brought up as a problem, which I don't think it is, but either way, we would have a way to answer to that rather than just anecdotal experience. So.
Thank you. Councilor Remy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Anyone want to guess what the top dates were for last year for Airbnb in Keene? The dates of stays where there was the most number of people. Be October 14th and 15th.
Yeah.
And then October 8th. And then September 24th, which is Clarence DeMar. And then October 20, what was it? And then Pumpkin Fest was the next highest.
Well, don't forget foliage.
Yeah, and that's also
Yeah.
foliage, so, but weekends in the fall,
Yep.
not surprisingly. So,
Ms. Brenner?
Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add to what Ms. Marklon was just saying. That's really where we were coming from in proposing this as the next thing we could work on with Invest in H. Our concern is that if we continue to propose things like cottage court or the ADU changes, or, every time we've brought those up, we feel like every time it becomes a louder and louder sort of concern that's raised and pushback that we're getting is this whole discussion around short-term rentals. So I will say, I think that there are other ideas that we could go for with this grant. And so if that's what this board would like to do, I think we have time to pivot and go with a different idea. The reason why we decided to move forward with this idea, beyond the fact that we were asked to do it by the Joint Committee, is that we were concerned that we were going to continue to get pushback from the public and others on that issue, and it would be good to have a solid understanding. So thank you for that. I think you explained it better than I did, so thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to move forward. If I could entertain a motion.
I'm hesitant because I don't know that I want to do it.
Okay.
I move to authorize Chair Farrington to write and submit a letter of support for the City of Keene's application to the Invest NH Housing Opportunity Planning Grant Program.
Thank you. Second? Mr. Mayhew, thank you. Any further discussion? Councilor Remy?
I thank you, Mr. Chair. am kind of with Ms. Markelon of the, like, I don't know that this is the best use of the funds. I think it's a perceived problem that might not be reality. I think people know that there are short-term rentals out there, but I think there's a fixed demand for those. I think at some point either they're full or they're not, and if we have enough of them, then they'll stop being in demand. Like, it's, the average rental rate for Airbnbs in town is $193 a night. That's not something that people are competing with rental properties for that. So it's a very expensive number, and I think it's equally bringing money into the community. So I have a hard time with the idea of regulating them and therefore wasting money on a study to understand if we should. I have a hard time with. I do have a short-term rental, but I do 3 month minimum, so it's like not quite in what we're talking about, but for awareness for the group, so I do have that.
Mr. Cost?
So this idea came from PLD, I guess, is what you said, and then, so if we don't support this, I mean, is there a process to come up with candidate ideas? And also, how much is the grant for, or could be for?
Great question. So we can certainly pivot to a different grant idea. That there's still time to do that. The deadline, I think, is September 30th.
Yep.
So we have time to switch to a different idea, and we actually have a list of projects that the Joint Committee has asked us to work on, so we could pull from one of those, for example. And really what we would be asking you for is a letter of support, that you think this is a good project to work on. So if you don't, then I think it's worth talking about what you think would be a good, worthwhile project to work on. The ultimate goal of this grant is to promote or result in new affordable housing or workforce housing, or really any housing development in your community. So there's other things that we could go for. The maximum grant award that you can request is $100,000. We wouldn't be requesting that much, though, for the short-term rentals. It'd probably be somewhere in the ballpark of $40,000 that we would be requesting for that project.
My question is, so it requires a letter from the city council as well?
Yes, yep.
And who's tasked with that, do you know?
We're planning to go to city council. We're planning to take actually straight to committee. I think PLD or FOP, I can't remember where we landed. And then it would go to city council to their meeting, I believe on the 19th, September 19th, I think is their next meeting. So we would be able to just get in before the grant deadline to get hopefully a letter of support from city council. I think if the board wants us to come back, we do have time to come back to your meeting in September, if you'd like to see another idea before authorizing the chair to write a letter of support, or you could authorize him to write a letter of support tonight, for a different project. We just wouldn't have details for you tonight.
Councilor Remy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion that I made does not say what it's for. So to be fair, it's just saying that we support getting an Invest New Hampshire grant, which I can stand behind that. I don't know that this is the best use of those funds, but the motion that I made is not specific.
Right. It's, gives us wiggle room. Ms. Markland?
Thank you. The previous project that we looked at, just housing in general, did that look at like rentals in detail at all? Like, did it hit on this?
So are you talking about the housing needs analysis?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, it did. And actually, one of the recommendations from the housing needs analysis was to do a rental registration program, including short-term rentals. The consultants at the time did take a look at short-term rentals in Keene, and we did a little bit of outreach to the community around them. And at the time, there really wasn't that much of an outcry. There was a little bit, but not a lot. And so their recommendation really was to track and just keep tabs on how many there are, so that if it does start to be an issue, we could respond appropriately at that time. But their recommendation was for rentals citywide, regardless of whether it's short-term or not. And a registration program would really just be getting contact information. So it wouldn't necessarily be regulating, it would just be knowing where they are located and having a list so that we could contact the owners if we needed to, like in an emergency situation, for example.
Counselor Remy?
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I do still think that it's like worthwhile to have the data, because I feel like this has just been an ongoing sort of pushback. I wonder if we can like broaden it a little bit rather than with it being like looking toward regulating it. That we're just trying to get a fuller picture of rentals specifically. Because I feel like when we've talked about housing, or what we focused on in housing is, you know, a house that I'm going to purchase or that is built so that I can purchase. So I wonder if we can just sort of broaden it a little bit. And especially because I again, feel like it's not a huge issue here. We probably shouldn't regulate what someone is doing with their home. And also, just anecdotally, I'm a student at Antioch, and I know that like in the fall, whenever people are coming and they're coming up for the weekend to stay in a hotel, it's incredibly expensive. There aren't any Airbnbs. They're staying in Brattleboro. So, you know, just to piggyback on what you're saying, I agree with that there's a need, and but it would be interesting to like get a better understanding and a grasp of what we've got, and maybe there are opportunities to, you know, there are also homes that have vacant apartments because they're like letting the home go, and I don't know, there might just be opportunity there generally.
Yeah, I think the underlying premise is, and I think it should be challenged, because I don't know if it's true or not true, but that short-term rentals are squeezing out workforce housing. Just not sure that those are the properties that are really going into, you know, Airbnb and VRBO, but again, I don't know that. That's just my impression of my experience with that type of rental. Counselor Remy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'm still scrolling through, like, they have a policy toolkit on the Airbnb thing, which has like, here's an example of like 30 different cities with different ordinances that they have and how they've managed them. The number one thing that they bring up in here is short-term rental registration, and that's that most cities, many local governments opt for a registration system to support compliance. And I think the funds frankly would be better used just putting that in if we think that's something we want to do than doing that. I don't know.
Sorry to jump in here.
Director
I
Rounds.
think these are all discussions we've been having on staff based on the fact that we had the housing needs analysis basically said this is an issue, maybe not that big an issue, but then we hear from the community that it might be a bigger issue, at least personally for people. And I think one of the benefits of going with an InvestNH grant is, one, we can actually understand the size of the problem, if there is a problem. Shouldn't say problem, issue, market, whatever, and then say we can even put together or work with a consultant to put together a set of potential regulations that the council can choose to put into place at some point in the future, or could grow with the problem. I think one of the things that we're dealing with respect to short-term rental regulation is, as Mr. Clancy noted, there are a lot of communities that have tried and a lot of communities that have gone to court over their regulations. And there's a pretty narrow path to follow to make these regulations work in New Hampshire because of that court record. And so we want some outside help making that work, because we don't want to stop an economic development tool from working, but we also don't want to squeeze out even middle income people, not just workforce housing, but we don't want to remove housing from the market that could be better used in other, to grow our resident base. So I think that the benefit of doing this is, one, it takes a little bit of work off of the staff's plate. We have, as Mary mentioned, we have this list of ordinances that that the Joint Committee has asked us to work on. And as much as I like to watch them scurry around and work as hard as they can, I also want them to have weekends and, some free time to themselves. And so this is an opportunity to put some of that work on a consultant so that we can focus on other projects, like the master plan, like development on private roads, all those sorts of other questions that are still out there. So I'm really interested in the conversations that's happening because this is the conversation we have. So I really want to encourage it, but I also want to explain why we're coming to you.
Mr. Cost?
So this is about housing, and I understand it, and maybe these kinds of relationships are taking away housing from what would be normal rentals for people who need housing, permanent type housing. So I understand the logic, and I guess I understand that if people in the community, if we talk about ADUs and other things, they might push back and say, well, the ADU is going to become a Airbnb, and we don't want that in our neighborhood. And I could understand if we have the ammunition to say, if it's not a problem, it's not a problem. But also just, in my mind, I think from the master plan, from everything in the community, there are a lot of problems, but housing always seems to be that little circle that's off on that chart from the master plan. And anything that could be more directly helping us get more housing, directly getting more housing, whether it's understanding where there's land to build, understanding what it would take to get the development community interested in here, understanding, really understanding that stuff and driving down more to ultimately get some development in the area. I would think would be really important. And maybe this grant isn't even appropriate for that, I don't know. But that just seems to be something really important, and the more we could do directly, the better.
Mr. Chair, can I respond to that really
Ms.
quickly?
Brenner?
Thank you. So there is another grant opportunity out there that we're going to hopefully be pursuing. It's very competitive, so we'll see. It's called Pro Housing. And so we might come back to you with information about that. That would be more directly focused on getting housing developed. The Invest in H grant, we can use it for planning, auditing our regulations, or developing regulations. We can't necessarily use it for things like identifying all of the developable properties, for example, or land acquisition, or networking with it's narrowly for developing regulations, at least this phase 3 version. So what we could do is, again, take a look at that list of projects. One of them was parking minimums. One of them was coming up with those, a zoning change for those neighborhood nodes in the master plan future land use map. One of them was the private road discussion. Trying to think of other things that we've talked about. Yeah. So there, we could go back through and see what we've already talked about, or we could even propose something new, like looking at a housing opportunity zone. That's something that's relatively new in New Hampshire. That is a way to kind of incentivize housing development. So that could be another project that we look into. So what we could do, if the board is interested, we could come up with an idea and just apply for it, and you could trust us, or if you want, we can come back to you at your September meeting. At that point in time, though, we probably wouldn't have much time to change the application anyways. So just wanted to throw that all out there.
Thank you. Mr. Clancy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to agree with Mr. Cost that though this is valuable information, I think the priority is we know that development needs to happen and more housing needs to happen. And I think this is a great grant opportunity, and I would like to see the planning or the auditing side of our application so that we can attract development. And I just feel like, you know, even though the community and us would like this data for short-term rentals, I think it's more important that we look at getting more housing in this community.
Thank you. Well, without, beating this too much, I think Councilor Remy's point that the motion gives us flexibility to recommend whatever project we think makes the most sense or is the highest priority. So why don't we go ahead with a vote on the motion, and then we can circle back with what we think is the right, unless you really want to put a specific item in. Mr. Clancy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just don't feel comfortable voting, as much as I want us to go for this grant, I don't feel comfortable voting on something, and it could be up in the air on what we're going for, because it could just be another thing that is valuable information, but it might not be priority.
Okay. I do believe that we're not the only voice, that whichever committee and then the council itself is going to have a say as well as to what particular project they would like the grant for. So I think I think if we hold this up, we will lose the opportunity to make the submission by September 30. But that's okay too, I guess.
Well-
Mr. Cost?
Thank you. So, there's an opportunity to get some state money to do something useful. We discuss what it would be and how it would be, but I don't think we should do anything, as you were saying, Mr. Chair, to jeopardize not getting the grant, even if it ends up being for something that we all don't think is the highest purpose. I wouldn't want to be part of that vote they couldn't decide what to do, so they got no money. Because anything we do will be useful, but there might be some things that we think are more useful. So I would think the way you did your motion, to me, makes great sense, and to agree to go after the grant for something.
Ms. Markland was next.
I just will echo that. Also, we have an amazing staff here, and I very much trust their judgment, so.
Thank you. Councilor Remy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while it is rare that that's not the case, it's okay for us to not be unanimous on something too. So if we frequently are, it's okay if we're not. I don't think it's the best use of the funds. I just looked back at the housing needs assessment in 2021. They listed that there were 50 units in town, which is 0.5% of the housing. So it could have quadrupled since then, and I still wouldn't think it's a problem. So. Yeah.
All right, so why don't we move forward with the vote at this time? So, would you mind reading your motion again?
As a reminder, I moved to authorize Chair Farrington to write and submit a letter of support for the City of Keens application to the Invest New Hampshire Housing Opportunity Planning Grant Program.
Thank you. So let's call the vote then. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is approved. Thank you. And I guess we'll figure it out with the city council. Okay. Next, we have a training module, site plan review process. Ms. Brenner, I assume that's you.
Yes, I apologize. You have to hear me talk so much today. But this is the training that I was going to give, I think last month or the month before, I can't quite remember. And we ran out of time. So I believe I sent you the slides. I haven't changed them at all since then. Let me see if. So I just changed the date. So these should look pretty familiar, but when we asked you about the topics that you would like training on, I think it was pretty much unanimous across the board. Everyone said site plan review. So what I think I'm proposing is to actually split this into multiple trainings. So tonight, I'm just going to go over what site plan review is generally, and then go more in detail with the development standards that are in your regulations. And as I go through, I'll just kind of point out areas where staff has had some discussion about potential future changes so that you can kind of get an idea of areas that we've identified and maybe get some preliminary feedback from you on that. So I'll just jump in. So tonight, I'm going to go over the authority and the state RSA, the minor project review committee, the thresholds in your regulations for major and minor site plan review, a high-level overview of the major site plan review process, so kind of the timing of everything. With that, the board review of site plans, so what you do here in the meetings, just a really high-level overview of the site development standards, off-site improvements, and then decisions. So the authority for site plan review comes from RSA 674-43. Basically, for communities that have adopted a zoning ordinance and established a planning board and have adopted subdivision regulations, those communities, the planning board is authorized to develop site plan regulations in order to review and improve site plans for the development or change or expansion of use of tracts for non-residential uses or for multifamily dwelling units. So under state law, this applies specifically to commercial and multifamily, which they define as being more than 2 dwelling units. In addition, they specify that the site plan review regulations can address the items that are listed up there on the slide. So things like drainage and flooding, protection of groundwater, pollution, which includes things like noise, smoke, et cetera, fire safety, aesthetics, open space, so preservation of open space, streets, so the arrangement and design of streets, character of land for development, the health, safety, convenience, and prosperity of the public. That was, these are all paraphrased, I should mention. I shortened a few into one there. There's also the innovative land use controls, which the city of Keene has utilized for things like steep slope regulation, surface water protection, the conservation subdivision that we have. Those kind of all fall under that category of innovative land use controls. And then preliminary review of site plans is another item that our regulations can address. And in Keene, we do have that. So I guess before I move on, are there any questions about, in general, in the state statute, where your authority comes from and what you're able to do with your site plan review powers? Okay, all right. So state statute also allows the planning board to delegate your site plan review authority for what they call minor projects. And minor being defined by the local municipality. You get to decide what that threshold is. So that's a very sort of local thing. In Keene, the planning board, with the adoption of the land development code, has delegated minor site plan review authority to a minor project review committee. This committee, as dictated by state statute, is composed of city staff with experience reviewing site plans. So that includes the public works director or their designee, the community development director or their designee, the zoning administrator or their designee, the fire chief or their designee, and then a designee of the city manager. So there's 5 members of the minor project review committee. The minor project review committee is similar to the planning board, has let's see if it's, still has to hold a public hearing, so there's still a notice to abutters, which has to be a 10-day published notice in the paper, plus a posted notice in 2 public locations, all 10 days, not including the day of the posting or the day of the meeting, all of that. But because it's, they don't meet such a high threshold for review and it's being reviewed by city staff, there's a little bit less pressure on the meeting. It's held during the day. I believe right now we have them scheduled for Thursdays at 10 a.m., I want to say. So it's during normal work hours, which is a lot easier for applicants who have to hire a professional. It can be during their normal working day, that sort of thing. So it's a little bit more convenient for the applicant. And we also have a shorter time frame for the application review. And just as I mentioned, the public notice and a butter notice is still required. So members of the public, if they have questions or comments, they'll get the notice that the project is happening. They have the opportunity to come to the public hearing, or they can also come in ahead of time or write us an email or send us a letter if they have comments or questions as well. And at any time, any decision of the minor project review committee can always be appealed up to the planning board. So there's always that relief valve. So in your site plan regulations, the threshold for a minor site plan and a major site plan are shown up here on the screen. Before the land development code, any new construction of 1,000 square feet or greater always automatically had to go to the planning board. And so there were a lot of projects that came through the planning board that were actually relatively minor in nature, especially in some of the more commercial and industrial districts where you see really large buildings and where a 1,000 square foot addition is actually pretty small. It seems like a pretty minor change to have to come to the planning board. So one of the changes that was made with the land development code is that new buildings or structures between 1,000 and 5,000 square feet in gross floor area could go to the minor project review committee. Anything above that would come to planning board. But we also broke out additions, recognizing that in some areas of the city, there's these massive buildings where a 10% addition, it would be huge compared to, you know, a smaller building closer to the downtown where a 10% addition would be much smaller. So we added that percentage increase in size to the addition as a threshold. Another threshold is the number of vehicle trips per day. So if a new use or a new development will increase the number of vehicle trips by 100 per day or 50 during a peak hour, then that is an automatic trigger where they have to go to the planning board. So what that means is that we take the estimated trips from the previous use, subtract that from the projected trips from the new use, and if that difference is a net increase of 100 or more, they would have to come to the planning board. So it really is meant to be a large traffic impact that would require someone to have to come to the planning board. In addition, another threshold is the installation of impervious surfaces, land disturbance, and then when we get towards kind of like the bottom of this list, when we were going through the land development code, we tried to come up with more specifics, but where we really landed was giving a lot of discretion to the community development director in terms of deciding where a project should go. So this says that modifications to the site or building that warrant major site plan review as determined by the community development director based on proposed impacts, and change of use as determined by community development director based on proposed impacts. So what we as staff do when a project comes in or an inquiry comes in, and if they don't fall under any of those sort of automatic triggers, you know, the 100 vehicle trips, the square feet of new construction, et cetera, then we look at, okay, is it going to have a big impact on the site and the surrounding area? And if not, we will either have it go through what's called an administrative planning review, just to make sure it meets our regulations, or we can refer it to the minor site plan review committee. One thing I will note is that anytime an applicant is requesting a waiver from regulations, that automatically pushes them up to the planning board. So anytime somebody wants to get a waiver from, the lighting standard, they have to come to you. They can't go through the minor project review committee for that. So is there any question on these thresholds? Mr. Chair, it looks like there might be a couple questions.
Mr. Clancy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when this list was created, is this something that the planning board voted on and dictated to you, or did city staff make this list? And if something like cottage courts that don't need a waiver or fall within building code, could that be given to minor site plan?
Great question. So to answer your first question, it was sort of a combination. When the land development code was being worked on, we had initially a steering committee that staff worked with pretty closely that kind of came up with the initial set of recommendations. And then it moved into the public workshop phase and was in that phase for, I want to say, like 9 months. It was a long time. And so then it went through the whole joint committee, planning board and PLD process. A lot of these thresholds came from the original regulations. We just, before the LDC, the minor site plan wasn't a thing. And so basically, everything here for minor site plan was a threshold for planning board. So what the land development code did was it took some of what was coming to the planning board and shifted it down to this minor project review committee to try and make things a little bit easier for applicants. Your second question is actually a really great question. So a conditional use permit in New Hampshire can only be granted by either the planning board or the zoning board or city council. But if the community decides to have it be zoning board or city council that grants a conditional use permit, it has to be after review and recommendation by the planning board. So what the city of Keene has decided was to send it to the planning board. My understanding is that there isn't the ability to have a conditional use permit go to the technical review committee. Same thing with subdivisions. So really the only type of approval that the minor project review committee can do is a site plan approval. That was a really good question.
Mr. Cost?
Thank you. I just have a thought about if it's downtown, something is like right downtown, then the minor site plan metrics are really significant. I mean, a 4,000 square foot something downtown or an acre downtown is significant. It seems to me like if it's out more in the residential or somewhere else, okay, it makes sense. But when you're downtown, it just seems the scale gets much finer and the smaller things could be really impactful. Does that take into account?
Oops, sorry, I just turned my mic off. So that is where the additions between 10 to 15% of the gross floor area of the existing building going to minor site plan, and then additions greater than 15%. That's the reason why we use the percentage for those thresholds. But you make a good point that new construction in the downtown, a 5,000 square foot new construction in the downtown would be pretty significant. And I think that's where a few years ago when city council and the planning board were discussing this, that's where those thresholds at the bottom sort of came in. And that's where they really felt that there still needed to be some level of discretion for the community development director to say, okay, technically this is only 5,000 square feet of new construction, but this warrants planning board review. So there still is a little bit of flexibility there for the community development director to make that call on a case-by-case basis. But yeah, you're right. It doesn't apply evenly in different areas of the city. Okay.
For something downtown, the historic commission would weigh in though, right?
They weigh in if it's an existing building that's 50 years old or older. Outside of that, the Historic District Commission has exempted those structures from their review. So any new construction, or if there's an existing building that's less than 50 years old, it wouldn't have to go through Historic District Commission review.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Right. So now I'm going to jump into the major site plan review process. So in the city of Keene, we require a pre-submission meeting with city staff. So this is with the Minor Project Review Committee. And we require that at least 2 weeks prior to submission. And the reason for that is to go over the plans with the applicant, with all of the staff from the various different departments in the room, so that even if the plans are only at a conceptual level, we can go over some of the key issues with the applicant that they'll need to address, and hopefully help them be prepared by the time they do apply. So the preliminary consultation stage is required for a major site plan review, so anything that meets the threshold for major site plan review. Subdivisions that are more than 3 lots or that include a road, and so that those require the preliminary consultation. So this is really meant to be for those larger, more complex projects. They have to go through that preliminary consultation phase. And generally, I believe the feedback that we get from applicants that go through that process is that that is helpful. And we do identify issues there that can kind of help applicants get sort of on the right track before they actually submit. And then the application submission deadline is 26 business days before the planning board meeting. We take 2 business days to do a completeness review of all of the applications that we receive. So we review them to make sure, okay, did they submit a site plan? Is the site plan stamped? Did we get a narrative? Did we get the application fee? Did they submit an abutters list? Does it include everyone within 200 feet, et cetera? So there's basically, we kind of go through the checklist of application submittal items and make sure that they're there. Then we send the application out for departmental review. So we will send the application to the engineering office in Public Works. We send it to the fire staff. We send it over to building for code review. We do a zoning review, and then planning does their review. So city staff, we give ourselves a week to do that review and send back comments. And then what we do in planning is we compile all of those comments into one document so that the applicant isn't getting a bunch of random comments here or there that they then lose track of, and they're not getting them from multiple people. They just get one summary of all of the comments that are issues or questions that we've identified in one memo. We send that out to the applicant, and then they then have, I believe it's a full week to address any comments. So we send out the comments by a Friday at the latest, and the revision deadline is the Monday following the week after that. So they get 6 business days essentially to address those comments. And then the day after that revision deadline, we send out the notice to the paper, because that has to be sent out 2 days before it runs, and that has to run 12 days before the meeting. And then we also mail out all of the abutter letters, and so the abutters should be getting their letters well within, like, we send it out 10 days ahead of time, so they probably get them, a day or 2 after we send them, so they're able to get the notice, hopefully in enough time to learn about the project and hear about the public hearing. Then, if a site visit is going to be held, we hold the site visit the week before the meeting on Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. Then the application gets to the planning board meeting itself. At the planning board meeting, when you vote to accept an application as complete, that sort of starts the 65-day decision clock, which is an important kind of thing to note, because in state statute, there's the 65-day decision deadline. Within that 65-day time frame, the planning board has to make a decision or the project basically gets automatically approved. So you have 65 days to make a decision. You always have the option, if you feel at the end of that 65-day time frame that you don't have enough information or you're not ready to make a decision, you can always just deny the application without prejudice, and then the applicant can resubmit the same exact application. But if you don't make a decision, it's just automatically approved. So that's just important to note.
Mary, just
Yeah.
one thing to add to that. You can also request more time from the applicant.
Yes.
If you get to your 65 days, you're like, hey, we need more time, the applicant can waive that 65-day decision clock.
Yes, but you need that in writing. And then, once you accept the application as complete, you can either open the public hearing at that same meeting, which is what our general practice is, or you could say, okay, we're accepting it as complete and we'll open the public hearing at our next meeting, which is what some planning boards do. Typically in Keene, we'll open it the same day that you accept it as complete. And then after you go through the public hearing process, which I'll go through in a moment, the board either votes to continue. So as long as you're staying within that 65 days, you can keep continuing to another meeting. You can approve, like issue final approval that night. You can approve with conditions, or you can deny. I will note that instead of denying, staff strongly recommends continuing if you can, just so that you give the applicant more time to address your concerns. But you always have that option to deny. And then once you've issued final approval, that's the other sort of clock that gets started. That starts the 30-day appeal clock for abutters or any other aggrieved parties to appeal your decision if they so desire. Any questions on, I know that was a lot of information, but that's how we do this whole process in Keene. Our goal with this is to hopefully get projects through in one meeting. So rather than having them go to multiple planning board meetings, hopefully with the staff review ahead of time and doing the staff report and all of that, they're at a point where all the major questions and issues have been answered by the time they get to you. Obviously, that's not always the case, and more complex projects can require more time, but that's our goal with this process.
Councilor Remy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 90% of the time, I feel like our conditions precedent that we leave sitting on an application are the owner needs to sign the plan and we need a bunch of copies of it. Is there anything we can do to eliminate that as a condition precedent, and they can show up with it signed or with copies in hand? Is that, because I haven't seen any where we haven't put that as a condition precedent, and it seems like we could get them in and out of here with final approval pretty easily.
Yes, we can do that. And we have done that in some instances where we feel like there's a very low risk that it won't get approved and that other conditions will be placed, that sort of thing. The one thing though is that that's a little bit risky for the applicant, because if they go through the hassle of like getting all the Mylars and everything printed and the owner signing and all of that, and then they get here and then you want to add a condition, now they have to do it all over again after they've met that condition, potentially. So there's a little bit of risk there for them, but we do let applicants know, especially in situations where it's a pretty straightforward application and we feel like there's a low risk, that they can do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Cost.
Thank you. So in the case of that project we were talking about earlier with the fencing and the screening and the two houses, townhouse, if we really wanted them to get rid of the invasive species and not use that as their screening material, we would have had to, at that middle green box, then add a specific condition and it would actually be then inspected and all of that stuff. So that's what we have to do if we really want to have something like that.
Yes, and I will talk a little bit more about the board review of site plans. But essentially, even if the applicant makes a representation during their presentation that, oh yeah, I'm definitely gonna do X, Y, Z, and you're like, oh, that's great, but it's not shown on the plans, it's not a note on the plan, it's not part of the condition, there's actually nothing holding them to that besides, their own honesty, I guess. But there's nothing legally that we can enforce there. So yeah, it's just good practice if you hear the applicant say something and you're like, oh, that's really important to me, or I think that addresses concerns that we heard from the public or something like that, to make it a condition of approval, if the applicant sounds like they're willing to do it. Great. So next is just some best practices for reviewing the site plans, and some of this comes from case law. So when you as a board are reviewing a site plan, you're using your site development standards to guide that process. And I'm not gonna go into detail with your site development standards tonight, but you have those really 13 standards, and you can't replace any of those standards or supplant them with your own personal feelings about a project. So even if, say, a type of business comes in and you really don't like their business practices, or you think that they're not a great business, unless it relates to a site development standard, you can't have that factor into your decision. Also, another thing is, and this actually comes from case law, is that you can't rely on lay opinions or anecdotes that have been refuted by uncontroverted expert evidence. So what that means is that if people come and say, well, I think this project is going to increase runoff in my property, but they have a study prepared and stamped by a licensed engineer that says, actually, this project is going to reduce runoff and it's going to reduce flooding. You now have uncontroverted expert evidence on the table that says one thing, and then you have basically somebody's fear of what might happen. And you can't rely on a lay opinion or anecdotes from somebody if it's been dispelled, I guess, by evidence from an expert. Now, you could have, if you had, you're always able, if you want to as a board, to get a third party expert to look at something. So if you think, okay, well, the applicant has said this, but we're wondering if, that may or may not be the case, you could hire your own third party expert to take a look at it as well. So for example, with your earth excavation regulations, those actually require that the planning board hire a third party to review the plans prepared by the applicant's consultant, to basically check to make sure that the plans actually meet your regulations. So that's always an option for you in an instance where you feel like more evidence or more information is needed. But you can't just say, oh, we don't believe you, and then not actually have anything else to back that up. Another item, you should make sure that you have all the necessary information before closing the public hearing. You always have the option, the chair has the option to open the public hearing back up to get additional information, but it's a good practice to try and get all of that information before closing the public hearing. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I really want to ask the applicant a few more questions, raise your hand and let the chair know, so that the chair can call the applicant back up and you can ask them those questions before the public hearing is closed. Or if you have, and then same thing with a member of the public, if a member of the public comes up and says something, and then later on you have a question about it, you can always ask that person to clarify. That's fine. Another item I just wanted to let you know is that you can deliberate and vote at a later meeting. So if you feel like you got a lot of information that night and you're not ready to make a decision, or you just need more time, that's a possibility. You should be avoiding what's called ex parte communication. So you shouldn't be talking to other board members about projects. You shouldn't be talking about members of the public about projects. Definitely not the applicant or abutters. So if somebody comes up to you and is like, oh, hey, Ryan, you're on the planning board, right? Or what do you think about this project? Just say, come to the meeting. Feel free to come to the meeting. You can, talk about it then. Don't talk to them about the project. Sorry, Ryan, I didn't mean to pick on you. I'm just an example. It's in your rules of procedure. It's just not a good idea. And it's also not allowed. And all that being said earlier about not being able to rely on lay opinions, you can rely on your own personal knowledge of the area. So the reason why you're on this board and appointed to this board is because you are experts in your local community. You have connections, you know the area. So feel free to use your own knowledge of the community and the areas where you live and work. Any questions about all of this?
Mary, I just wanted to say too, with respect to the ex parte communications, we shouldn't be emailing each other, with opinions or stuff about projects. Should all be done within the confines of this room.
Yes, that's true. So even if you are emailing other folks on the board, that still can create the conditions of an illegal meeting under RSA 91A. So if you have a question, what we would recommend is that you email staff directly and don't copy any other board members. That way, that's just the safest thing to do, because then we can hopefully answer your question, or if it's something that is okay to share with the rest of the board, we can then turn around and share it, but it's always safer to just email us directly. That way you won't accidentally start a conversation via email. So that's a great point.
Mr. Clancy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions. I'll ask that. So if a board or two board members wanted to, not site plan reviews, but wanted to work on ordinances or procedures, is that allowed outside of meetings?
Not a good idea.
And then just to ask, and then so if the board wanted to up its standards and approvals, and let's say a business was coming to town and they needed some approvals, but we wanted to, if the history doesn't equate to those new standards that we're setting, could there be action taken against the board if the application was denied, or if we put in stricter standards than we have in the past? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if the board is working on changing its regulations, is it kind of like, I think I'm understanding your question. So if the board wants to change its regulations to make them more strict or restrictive or just change them, it kind of depends on where you are in the process. If you're just kind of in an informal discussing potential changes, but the regulations that are on the books are what's on the books, and somebody comes in with a formal application, you have to follow what's on the books. Now, if you're formally in the process of, like in the midst of changing the regulations, like you've noticed a public hearing for changes to your regulations, then an applicant comes in, they have to, and it would impact their proposal, they have to wait until you've gone through that process. So like, it's kind of a timing issue there. But yeah, that's a great question. Any other questions? No?
Mr. Cost?
So we're on the board, but we're also just citizens, residents. So if I wanted to write a message to the mayor as a citizen, not on any subject we're talking about, I mean, we can do that, or we can't even do that because we also sit on a board, even though it might not have anything to do with any board business.
It depends on if it has So I think the key there is whether or not it is or could be planning board business. So if it's not planning board business, or it probably won't be planning board business, then I'd say you're probably pretty safe to do that. If it is planning board business, or if it could be in the future and it actually ends up being planning board business and you've already like publicly made a comment about it, then that might be a reason for you to recuse, depending on the situation. So it's very situational. I think if you ever have a question, feel free to email us. We have our city attorney too that can help you think through some of these things. You are members of the public as well and have the right to comment on things. It might just impact your ability to be part of the board that's acting on that decision. So that's just the balance there.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, at some point, depending on the situation, you have to decide, do you want to address this, whatever topic of interest to you, as a citizen of the city of Keene, or as a board member on the planning board of the city of Keene? And in certain situations, you don't get to be both. And it comes down to fundamentally either a conflict of interest or the perception of a conflict of interest.
Yeah, and also prejudging an application. So if you give if you give the perception that you've prejudged an application, that's also problematic. So one example would be in another community, a member of the planning board went on social media and said, "Oh, this project is terrible. Don't worry, I'm going to vote now." You can't do that, right? And then that member should have then not acted as a sitting member of the board on that application. So that's kind of what it comes down to. You don't want to give the impression that you're prejudging. You don't want to prejudge, and you don't want to give the impression that you're prejudging an application. And then there's also instances where you have a conflict of interest. So for example, if you're in a butter to an application, you're automatically considered to have a conflict of interest and should not be sitting on that matter. Okay. Oh.
Councilor Remy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On that, though, we've run into, so the downtown project, we have counselors that own property on Main Street, right? And it's come into gray area on recusals and like what that means. And it's like, this is a broadly impacting public thing. If we were, like, the reason I'm saying this, if we were to vote on, it's not within our purview, but recommending a new driveway ordinance, just because you have a driveway, that doesn't mean you have a conflict, right? So there's like broadness standards to it, right? I think that's important to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's also a difference between the planning board and a land use board and city council. Like, a planning board is quasi-judicial. Like, you're making decisions on private property, where the city council is acting as the legislative branch, as the champion of the public good.
So, my driveway is an L shape. If we were to vote on to whether or not L-shaped driveways should be allowed, it's a pretty generic thing, right? It's not specific to my property, so that's where there's a gray area of the line.
And again, if you ever have a question, feel free to email us. I can't promise that I'll know the answer, but we'll definitely find the answer for you if we can. So, great. I'm going to move on really quick. So I know you're all fairly familiar with the public hearing format, just because this is probably the part that you go through every month. But I did want to go through it really quickly. So the format that we use in Keene is, after you accept the application as complete and the chair opens the public meeting, we first have the applicant present. And again, representations by the applicant are not binding unless clearly made a condition of approval. Then we have staff present, and that's based on the staff report that we prepare for your agenda packet. Then the public has an opportunity to comment. And then once the public is done, and the public kind of includes the applicant as well. So they're considered a member of the public, and I guess technically staff probably are as well, but we're kind of in a gray area. Once you close that public comment portion and you close the public hearing to go into deliberation, that's the part where you should have hopefully gotten all of the information that you need to make your deliberation. During the public comment, you should not be deliberating. You're certainly welcome to ask clarifying questions, but the idea here, again, you're quasi-judicial, you want to get all of the information first before you start judging or making decisions or sharing your opinions. So get all of the information first to the best of your ability, then that's when you can have your deliberation. And the deliberation can be done both as just a general deliberation before a motion is on the table, or if you prefer, you can make a motion, second it, and then open it up for discussion. That's kind of the two ways that it can be done, and both are fine. Both are putting into the record what your reasoning is for the decision. After your deliberation, you can always vote to continue if you need more time. I'm not going to go into this again. When you're making your decision and going through your deliberation, you should be basing your deliberation on the development standards, which I've listed up here on the slide. Another thing that I just wanted to mention, because it doesn't come up very often, but it can come up, is something called off-site improvements. So these are improvements that are necessitated by a development, but they're improvements that are located off of that private property associated with the development. So the main thing that comes up is, okay, there's a big development right near an intersection that's already not functioning very well, and it's going to drive a ton of traffic to that intersection. It's going to create the need for the city to upgrade that intersection, which is going to be a huge expense to the taxpayer as a result of this development. So what you as the planning board have the ability to do is to say, okay, developer, we'll approve this, but you have to do X, Y, and Z to this intersection so that it doesn't fall on just, the general taxpayer to pay for something that came about as a result of your development. The example that I have up here is one of the off-site improvements that this planning board has required in the past. This is the subdivision that on Magnolia Way, which is off of Winchester Street. When that was approved, the planning board at the time required improvements to Matthews Road, which was directly across. So they had to kind of realign that intersection and create a right turn lane because of the increased traffic that would be coming to that intersection. So just to give you an example of what that could look like. You do need to have a pretty strong logical connection between the development and the proposed, changes and the off-site improvement that you're requiring. And it is limited specifically to highway drainage and sewer and water upgrades that are pertinent to that development. So it can't just be like anything. It has to be related to an impact from that development on, infrastructure, public infrastructure that the city has to build and maintain. Are there any questions on that?
Mr. Clancy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's kind of, we had the Wickham's Mill Road one, and a lot of members from the public were worried about the intersection where the state is in charge of. So when there is something like that requires changes, but it's state-owned, what authorities do we have?
Yeah, so we can't require a change to a state highway. That's a really good point. We could, if there is a large development, we would want to notify the state and let them know and work with them on that. But this is more for local, like municipally controlled and owned systems. I think it can be used for state, but you'd have to coordinate with that. I don't know if, I'm looking at Evan to see if he ever had that situation come up in Hollis.
Yeah, we, it was a 111, there was a proposed convenience store, and the sight lines were a little sketchy. So they were, the applicant got involved with the state DOT pretty early in the process to figure out what their expectations would be for drainage into their right-of-way, as well as improving the sight lines. So that project never ended up getting actually approved and done, but DOT was involved with that. So yeah, if it ever gets into that situation, usually Public Works will be the first to kind of be like, yeah, let's contact the regional office and see what they want, and then it kind of goes from there.
Yeah. But yeah, if you're just in the middle of a meeting and no one's talked to the DOT, requiring a change to a state highway is not advised. But that is an example. I'd say the Whitcombs Mill development was pretty small, but let's, for kicks and giggles, say that they were proposing 50 homes. We as staff would have probably said, okay, you should be requiring that this developer upgrade this 1-lane bridge to a 2-lane bridge, or, you know, there would have been a lot more that would have gone along with that. So it's kind of small developments, you're probably not going to be requiring anything, but this is more for like larger developments. Okay. And then board decisions. So again, you have 65 days to act. You can approve with no conditions. So that would be the situation where the applicant comes prepared with everything. You can approve with conditions, and then the applicant has 180 days to meet any conditions precedent to final approval. The conditions have to be related to the specific criteria that you have. So it has to be related to one of your development standards, or if it's a conditional use permit, to one of the conditional use permit standards. It has to be related to one of your standards. It shouldn't just be a random thing that you put on the applicant, if that makes sense. You can also deny the application. If you do, your reason for denial has to be very clearly stated. And if the applicant meets the development standards and you still feel that you need to deny it, it has to be supported by really compelling evidence and analysis. So you have to have, basically what you want to do in the case of a denial is you want to really make sure that you're building up the reasons in the public record, because denials have a very high chance of getting appealed to the Superior Court. And that's why staff always recommend continuing rather than denying if the decision timeframe allows. And again, the reason for that is to give the applicant time to address your concerns or address concerns raised by the public. It also gives staff a chance to then confer with the city attorney to start drafting potential language for a denial. So yeah, it's just kind of a best practice that we recommend. Some best practices I just wanted to go over. If questions or concerns come up during public comment or deliberation, it's good practice to invite the applicant to respond. So again, you do want to try and get as much information as you can before deliberation, but if you close the public hearing and you're in deliberation and someone says, well, what if we ask the applicant to do this? Would that address your concern? And everyone says, yeah, I think that's a great idea. You should stop there and say, let's ask the applicant if they're willing to do that. So that's just a best practice. To do that, you have to open up the public hearing and invite the applicant to come up and respond. Always try to be as clear as you can about what served as the basis for your decision. You know, there's a much lower risk when you're approving something, but approvals can also be appealed by abutters, so it's always just good practice to state, well, yeah, this meets all of our standards, so I'm going to vote for this. You know, just even saying that is a good practice. And then just another reminder that your observations and experience are very important, but if you have expert evidence to the contrary that's uncontroverted by other expert evidence, then you can't basically ignore the expert evidence in favor of what you feel. So I think, oops, did I just go back?
I just
think that's
want to I just want to reiterate, strong, well-deliberated approvals are just as important as strong, well-articulated denials. A shaky approval puts an applicant at risk for an appeal that can derail and ultimately ruin a project. So it's really a good habit to even just come to the meeting, you've read the staff report, and you pick one or two standards that you think this application like really does a really good job at. Saying that during the deliberative portion of the public hearing is just good business. It gets it on the record, it strengthens the basis to really give that strong approval to help that project move forward.
Mary, I apologize if I should have known, if you've sent this out before in an agenda package, these charts?
The slides that I was sharing, I sent them as a follow-up from the last planning board meeting,
You did,
I
okay.
believe.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
All right.
But I can resend them as
No,
well.
no, that's
yeah.
all right. I mean, I'm sure I didn't kill them, I just overlooked them. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, Mr. Costa.
I know we want to go home. I do. But I was just kind of listening to what you were saying about, as we're deliberating, sometimes some of us, me, others, we listen and we don't say anything, and then the vote comes and boom, we approve it. But it sounds like we should more proactively say we're going to approve it, we like the project or whatever. We should then say, look, this is an important project, it meets all of the standards, it does this well, that, something to underscore, and even at that point say, because I do hear people say, and I'm going to approve it before the vote, right? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, because you gotta think about, if a project gets appealed, it's gonna go to Superior Court. The first thing the judge is gonna do is look at the minutes of the meeting. And if there's no discussion on the positive merits of the application for why the board decided the way it decided, that makes the legal analysis much more challenging for the judge. So applicants spend a lot of time and money to prepare plans, to get up here, to build housing, to bring new jobs into the community. And so anything we can do to help strengthen their application and protect it. I've been here 2.5 years or so. We are pretty lucky, knock on wood. Most projects that come before us are generally supported by the community. That is not always the case. So it runs the risk of getting complacent if we don't know how to handle a good application that might be receiving some animosity from the public to get an approval that is resistant to challenge.
Thank you, Mary. That was very well done. Very useful.
Great.
Okay. We're close. Next item on the agenda is staff updates. Ms. Brenner? Mr. Rounds, any staff updates for us?
Dead microphone,
Oh,
Mr. Chairman.
No updates, thank you.
okay, great. Thank you. At this time, I'll ask if any board members or staff has new business ideas? Same old business? All right, good. Okay, now we'll move to the upcoming dates of interest. Joint Committee of the Planning Board and PLD, September 9th. I think that may not happen.
That's correct. That meeting, may have already been canceled, actually. But the one in October, we do expect will be held, and that's the day after Columbus Day, so it's going to be a Tuesday.
Okay, good. Yeah, so you get a free day on the September 9th. Planning Board Steering Committee, September 10th, 11 a.m. Still on. Planning Board Site Visit, September 18th, 8 a.m., to be confirmed, depending on if we have a project that makes sense to look at. And then finally, the next meeting of this Planning Board, September 23rd at 6:30 in these chambers. So with that, I will, at 8:45, call this meeting adjourned.